If you have a Bible or a Bible app, if you'll turn to Isaiah chapter 9, and then also just leave it there in Isaiah because we will look at Isaiah chapter 60 very, very briefly. And then John chapter 1 and chapter 8. I know you got enough markers to put them in all those places, but start in Isaiah chapter 9. Maybe when you were a child, or if you have young children or grandchildren, you have heard this question at some point this month. Would you take me out to see the Christmas lights? You know, maybe when you were growing up, that was the big thing, to go see the Christmas lights. Columbia County is having a Christmas light fight where they've got houses that are competing for people's votes to be the most significant Christmas decorations. There are, I have not seen it in Augusta this year, but in years past, Augusta has actually had a Tacky Lights tour. And if you Google Tacky Lights tour, you find out lots of communities have tacky Christmas lights tours because lights have become a part of the Christmas celebration. Nobody has ever said, hey, it's dark and our subdivision just lost power. Let's go drive around and look at the darkness. Nobody says that. We want to go see the lights. And I was thinking about Christmas lights. I remember a couple of things from growing up about Christmas lights. Number one, when you could afford to buy a new strand of lights, they come in these nice little packaging and it's all wrapped up, real neatly. And you say to yourself, when I take down the lights off the tree, I'm going to put them back in this box very neatly and very organized so they'll be there for next year. Never happens, or at least if it does, good for you. Never happened with me. By the time you got around to taking off the Christmas lights, it was throw them in the box with all the other stuff from the tree. And next Christmas, you get out that box and you think, oh man, I should have taken the extra 10 minutes and wrapped them up neatly. And it was a great day when you had enough money to just say, forget it, I'm going to go buy new lights this year. And then in the old days, there were those lights, and those you electricians will know what the word is. I don't. But there were inexpensive Christmas lights. The problem with them was if one bulb burned out, the whole strand wouldn't work. And so I remember sitting down at the base of the Christmas tree, unscrewing each individual light on that strand and plugging in a new one, trying to find the one that was burned out, so that we could have a strand of Christmas lights. Again, it was a great day when you had enough money to just go buy a new strand of lights. I did some online exploring and found some interesting things between the relationship of lights and Christmas. The Christmas lights actually started out as candles in Germany during the 17th century. People would decorate their trees, but then nobody could see the decorations. And so they would actually put wax or pins and attach candles to the tree so people could see the decorations on the tree. Doesn't sound very safe. And they kept on doing that. And then around 1900, candle holders came into place. And so they would put candle holders around the trees. In 1915, they started using lanterns to replace the candles. And it really changed with the invention of the light bulb and Edison's discovery of electricity. He, they say, created the very first strand of electric lights, and during the Christmas season in 1880, he put them around the outside of his Menlo Park laboratory, and passengers on the train going in and out of town, driving by, got to see those lights, and it kind of piqued some curiosity. In 1882, the first Christmas tree to have electric lights on it was in New York, and it was lit by Edward Johnson, who was a friend of Edison's. And then eventually, around 1890, they were mass producing these strands of Christmas lights. However, they were very expensive and not really very safe. Some say that it was President Grover Cleveland who really kind of boosted the acceptance of these electric lights in 1895 when he asked for the White House family Christmas tree to be lit by these strands of electric lights. At that time, still, it was very expensive. And if you were going to do these electric lights, you had to hire what back then they called a wireman, which is a modern day electrician. And some have estimated that putting lights on a tree back then would cost the equivalent of about $2,000 in today's money. So, only the wealthiest people had those lights until about 1903, when General Electric began to put together pre-assembled kits of strand Christmas lights. But in 1917, a teenager named Albert Sadachi, whose family owned a novelty lighting company, suggested that his company put together these brightly colored strands of Christmas lights to sell to the public. Another big Christmas tree lighting tradition in the United States is the tree at Rockefeller Center. That started in 1931 when a group of construction workers at the Rockefeller Center put their money together to buy a 20-foot tall balsam fir just to kind of encourage themselves as they were working. In 1933, the Rockefeller Center publicists decided we're going to make this an annual event, and in 1951 it started to be broadcast. And these Christmas lights have become a distinctly American symbol of hope and resilience, especially during the days of the Depression and World War II. So thank you, Internet, for the history lesson on Christmas lights. But we who know the Bible and the true story of Christmas know when lights became associated with Christmas. I distinctly remember in school one of our professors saying that one of the terms that's used in the Bible to describe what happened when Adam and Eve sinned could be interpreted, the lights went out. He said it's almost the picture of somebody drawing the shades and the lights going out. Because through the pages of Scripture, sin is pictured as darkness. Which leads us to Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. That's Isaiah 9, 2. You may know Isaiah 9, 6, because Isaiah 9, 6 tells us the name of that light of Isaiah 9, 2. His name will be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And so we know that that light that shined in the darkness is Christ, the Messiah, born at Christmas time. And in case we still didn't get it, in Matthew chapter 4, it tells us that Jesus is the fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 9. In Isaiah 60, arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. Christmas lights started when the darkness of sin was in the world, and the light of the world of Jesus comes into existence at Christmas time. But before we go any further into talking about lights, we need to talk a little bit more about darkness. Because the reason light is so significant is because of darkness. If there's no darkness, you don't need light. You don't go around in the middle of the noonday sun with a flashlight on, because you don't need it because there's not darkness. I think it's interesting that the longest night of the year occurs just before Christmas. Typically, December 20th or the 21st, this year it's the 21st, is the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. They're predicting that this year, on December the 21st, the northern hemisphere will only have 8 hours and 46 minutes of daylight, It's more daylight than we had yesterday, but just it's the longest night of the year. You probably know about seasonal affective disorder, which is a real thing and which is abbreviated SAD. And seasonal affective disorder is at least partially caused when not enough light gets through your eyes into the brain to release serotonin. And so sadness and depression hits. And the part of the therapy for that is light therapy. And maybe you know about light therapy boxes that have these incredibly intensely bright light that you should be exposed to 2 or 3 times a day for a little while to get that serotonin going in your brain and lift that. Maybe you've had a little bit of it. These gloomy days where it's like, man, I want to see the sun. I just don't really feel good. I asked somebody one time how they were doing, and they said partly cloudy with a chance of rain. And I thought that's a pretty good description, isn't it? So, darkness impacts us. If you're sick at nighttime, it just seems that the night lasts forever. And you hear yourself thinking, if I can just make it till I see the sun, I think I'll be okay. We were created for the light. Now, of course, the darkness that Jesus was talking about and the prophets was talking about was spiritual. Because as we said, sin is often pictured as darkness. It is a spiritual darkness. Romans 1 talks about a generation who chose not to honor God as God, and their hearts were darkened. John chapter 3, the people of darkness rather than light. Romans 13, let's lay aside the deeds of darkness, put on the armor of light. 2 Corinthians 6, what fellowship does light have with darkness? So Christmas light started with the darkness of sin and Jesus, the light of the world, coming into this world. So let's look at what light does for us. Light dispels darkness. We live in an old subdivision, and too frequently we lose power. And don't ever like it when we lose power. And the whole neighborhood's out of power. And you get on the Georgia Power outage map, and it says 1,863 people affected. Yeah. But we don't like it. We feel better if we have a flashlight. But I've got to confess to you that if I could even find the flashlight, the batteries have probably been dead for 2 or 3 years. I remember one time Kim and Mike were coming to visit us, and I told them, Kimberly knew because she lived with us in that house for a while, that we may lose power. And so I've put a flashlight on the nightstand. And Mike looked at me and he said, you do know that we have cell phones and our cell phones have a flashlight. Oh, I'm an old man. It took me a while to figure out the phone had a flashlight. And I use that flashlight a lot. You go to these restaurants and somehow they think that they're supposed to have the lights dim. And it's been affirming to me to see that I'm not the only person in those restaurants with their phone out with the flashlight trying to read the menu. Light dispels darkness because darkness can be depressing and oppressive. I remember there was a few years ago when the area of Florida where my dad and mom lived was hit with 2 or 3 hurricanes in like a month span of time. And they were without power for 2 or 3 weeks, and the hurricane shutters were on the windows. They didn't see the sun for a while. And we saw a decline in my mom's Alzheimer's during that period of time because we were created for light. And darkness impacts us very negatively. I heard a child say one time, the lights went out and they said, my eyes got tangled. And I thought, what an interesting description of what happens in the darkness. Maybe that's a description of your life today. Your eyes feel tangled. You're in the darkness because spiritual darkness is confusing and it's oppressive and it puts a burden on you. And when you don't have the light of Christ in your life, the darkness can be overwhelming. But 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9 says that Christ came to bring us out of darkness into his marvelous light. Light gets rid of the darkness. Second, light reveals hindrances. You probably know how to find your way from your bed to the bathroom at night without turning on a light. I heard an evangelist who did a lot of traveling say that the first thing he did when he got to a hotel room was he paced out how to get to the bathroom. And it sounded kind of weird. It's like 8 steps to the base of the bed, and then I turn left 4 steps, so that he could go to the bathroom in the night without stubbing his foot or tripping over something. And maybe you've had the experience of thinking that you knew how to get from one spot to another in the dark in your house, except somebody had left a toy in the middle of the floor, or somebody had put a chair out 6 inches different than it had been and crash in the middle of the night. If you could have just turned on the light, you'd have seen the hindrances. There's a Bible verse to back that up. John 12:35. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where they are going. And again, maybe that's your life today. I'm in the dark. I have no idea where I'm going. I'm just muddling through the best I can. Well, Christ came to show us the hindrances. His light shines so that we can see the obstacles in our way. But it's not just enough to see the obstacles. You have to be able to see the way out. And light shows us the way out. Jesus does not say, oh, you've got all these hindrances in your life. Jesus shows us the way out. The great verse in 2 Timothy 3:16, all scripture is given by inspiration of God, is profitable for doctrine. That's God's requirement for us. For reproof, that's where we mess up. For correction, that's how to straighten up. And then instruction in righteousness. And Jesus does not just come to say, you terrible sinful people. He comes to show us the way out. He says in John 12:46, I have come into the world as a light so that no one who believes in me should stay in the darkness. Light will help you navigate life. We were created to serve God, and we will never ultimately find our way in the darkness of this world without Him, the light in our lives. Another thing about light, it brings life. You know that most plants need light to grow. But we know that light is the main source of energy for living organisms, that plants need light for photosynthesis to create oxygen. The last 2 or 3 years, Donna has been getting into growing plants in our yard. The problem is we have trees. Many, many, many trees. We live basically in the woods. And plants need sunlight. And they wouldn't grow. And so we learned, we have watched, well, I have sat in the room while she has watched, every TV show we can find on plants that will grow in the shade. And it doesn't matter who you watch. There's basically like 3 kinds of plants that grow in the shade. And they're all part of those 3 families. And if you're bored with those 3 families, oh well, because most plants, you read full sunlight. We don't have full sunlight anywhere on our property. But, it's light brings life. During this pandemic, you probably heard about vitamin D and how you should get out in your yard at least if there's some sun and get some vitamin D because it's created by the direct action of the sunlight. So you see, when I go to the beach, it's a health thing. It is part of my healthy lifestyle. It is, mentally and physically. You do better physically in the sun. You maybe have had a premature baby that you knew about who had jaundice. They put them under a certain kind of light for that healing. Light brings life. And as I was looking at this, I found a couple of interesting statements. In John chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, it says, "In him, Jesus, was life, and the life was the light of men." And then it says that I'm going to do a parenthesis and do a little bit of mini sermon here on a different topic. "The light shined in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." Here's the little mini sermon. Don't be surprised when darkness cannot understand light. Don't be surprised when people who don't know Christ don't understand you when you're talking about Christ. Because Paul says, the god of this world, the devil, has blinded the minds of those who do not believe, and they are incapable of understanding the truth, which is why prayer is an essential part of evangelism. If there are people in your life that you're trying to lead to know God, you need to be praying that God would begin to open their eyes so that they can see. Because naturally, darkness does not understand light. It happened to Jesus. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. But then in John 8, Jesus said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." John says his life was the light. Jesus says, if you follow me, you will have the light of life. Zechariah's prophecy says, the rising sun, again speaking of Jesus, will come to us from heaven to shine on those living in darkness. The old church song, "The whole world was lost in the darkness of sin, but the light of the world is Jesus. Like sunshine at noonday, his glory shone in. The light of the world is Jesus." And I want to encourage you that if you do not know Christ, that this Christmas season will be a wonderful time to ask him to forgive your sin and come into your life and shine his light into the darkness of your way. John said of Jesus, the light shined in the darkness. But remember that Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, "You are the light of the world." And for those of us who know Christ, I think we understand if there was ever a need for light, it's in this dark world. Because the darker the night, the brighter the light shines. I heard about a little boy who was downstairs. His mom couldn't quite figure out what was going on. He was in a room and all the lights were off. And she heard click, click, click. And she wondered what was going on. And she went down. He was standing in this dark room with a flashlight, turning it on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off. And she said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm punching holes in the darkness." As believers who know the light of the world, it's our job to be punching holes in the darkness. But the question is, how do you do that? I know a lot of people love to camp. I hope I'm not offensive, but my brain does not comprehend why somebody would leave a climate-controlled house and a soft mattress and go lay out on rocks, with a tent. That does not compute. I worked too hard to get a house to leave it and go pitch a tent somewhere, But I know there are people who love to do that. To me, camping is, Motel 6 or something. But I heard about this couple that loved to camp, but one of the frustrations they had was they tried not to use their lights too much at dark, and so they wanted to try to find a way to find something where they could find matches at night to light their little lanterns, without using up the batteries on their flashlights or whatever. And so they were at one of these outdoor stores, and they found a box of matches that the advertisement said they glowed in the dark. And they said, this is what you can use so that at night in your tent or wherever you're camping, you can see the matchbox so you can find your matches to light your source of illumination. So they bought them, tossed them in their bag, and 2 or 3 weeks later went camping. And it got dark, and they looked for the matches. They could not find them. They were not glowing in the dark. So they went ahead, had to get out their other illumination, and they found the box of matches in the bag where they had tossed it 2 weeks later. And they looked, and on the side of the matchbox, it said this: if you want me to shine in the night, keep me in the light. Because maybe what you know about glow-in-the-dark stuff is that they, quote, glow in the dark because they are made up of material that contains phosphor. And there are lots of different materials that contain phosphor. Phosphor, when it's put in the light and it's kept in the light, stores up the energy from the light. And then when it's dark, that energy radiates out from the phosphors and it looks like it's glowing in the dark. I remember how fancy it was one time when I could afford to buy a watch that had glow-in-the-dark hands so that at night you could look at your watch and you could see. But that watch had to be exposed to the light all day long if you were going to be able to see it at night. Because to glow in the night, you have to stay in the light. That'll preach, won't it? The question is, where are we spending our time? Do we spend our time in the darkness, or do we spend our time in the light? Say, well, I'm a Christian. I spend my life in the darkness, in the light. Yeah, but I think there's a lot of things that we do that are basically just living in the darkness. I mean, evaluate what you watch on television. Evaluate how much time you spend doom scrolling on social media. Man, you talk about a place of darkness. Every once in a while, on Twitter, I'll see somebody said, I'm going to take a break from Twitter. It's too bad. I'm leaving. A couple weeks later, they'll come back and say, I came back to Twitter for an hour. I'm gone. I forgot how bad this place is. There's a lot of darkness on social media. There's a lot of darkness in our world. And so many times we fall into the trap because I think we kind of really started doing it, during all the pandemic when that was about all there was to do. And I think we've gotten into the habit of spending a lot of time in things that basically are darkness. Now, I'm not telling you, cancel Facebook or Twitter or whatever the different things are now. I guess Facebook is passé now, but whatever, be careful, though, about spending so much time exposing yourself to the darkness that's out there that it takes away your ability to shine in the darkness. The way we shine as the light of the world is to stay in the light of Christ, to spend time with him in prayer, to spend time in his word, to sing songs of praise and worship, to get involved ministering into the lives of other people. And as we do that, his light will radiate through us, the light of the world. There's a lot of darkness in our world. There's a lot of people in your life living in darkness, just barely hanging on. My question is, into whose life will you shine this week? Into whose life will we allow the light of Christ to shine through us with a kind word, with a kind deed, praying for somebody that they don't even know we're praying for them? How can we bring light into the darkness of their lives? Father, thank you for light. Thank you for the light of the sun. Thank you for electricity. It's so nice to be able to walk into a house and flip a switch and light comes on. We take it for granted so much, but we thank you for it. But Lord, way more important than physical light is spiritual light. This whole world was lost in the darkness of sin, and then you came as the light of the world. And as we look around our dark world today, you have put us here to be the light. So Lord, may we stay in your presence so that we can soak up your light, so that as we go into the darkness, maybe it's the darkness of a classroom or the darkness of a job site or the darkness of a community, but as we go into the darkness, may your light shine through us. As we go through our day, we don't know who we're running into that is having a difficult time, who's living in a dark time, but may your light shine through us into their lives, I pray. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine on you and give you his peace now and evermore. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for coming out. God bless you.